quality. Mike, it's great for you to be able to join us today. We're really pleased that you've made the presentation for us. Really nice to have somebody from as far away as Northumberland, and obviously much further away than Gilbert ever travelled. So, but we live in different times. So, Mike, for others in the room, Mike and I are sort of old chums, really. We've worked together over the years. Mike used to work for the North York Moors National Park and is now CEO of the Northumberland Wildlife Trust. So we've got quite a bit of interest in common. So I was really interested in what you were saying there, Mike, about the two things, well, two or three things really. I think noticing detail, obviously that is really, really difficult. And we've had the same down here really. It's the extra time that we've had has really given us the chance to look at some things very, very closely. Which has been interesting and very much in our local environment. And I think the intact thing is quite a big point as well. So I think, we're having a chat just before we went live there, just about sort of things might seem to be abundant, but really they're not. Do you want to just give us your thoughts on where we're going with that?
Yeah, it's these sort of flexible baselines that we all sort of judge things with. What we think is abundant or not abundant now is based on our own personal lifespan and experience, and perhaps that of our fathers and grandfathers. So we actually don't have a very long memory of when things were relatively abundant, and it's hard to put your finger on any time in the past when that was the case, unless you go right back to sort of 8,000 years ago in the Mesolithic even. But in relatively recent times, really Gilbert White was living in a time when there was good abundance from every survey that he and others have provided us with. You can see that, all the things that we think now are endangered through the State of Nature reports and everything else, he was recording in very good numbers and a much wider variety. So he had both abundance and variety, biodiversity. And now, of course, this country has got one of the worst in terms of both of any European country. So it is immensely different. I think in my life, certainly I've seen that, but there isn't a golden age, certainly within our lifespans. If you look back to the 60s and 70s, actually it wasn't that great then. Particularly in the 70s, the use of agrochemicals at that time and pollution of the rivers was immense. All of that has been improved. So there's lots of improvements and positive changes. But we are now in a position where the little phenological changes he was observing year to year, which are natural changes, have been completely overtaken by man's interference to the point where we've got wholesale endangerment of ecologies. And so it's immensely different. Yeah.
And on the other hand, we've got quite bizarre things happening. So we had a white-tailed sea eagle flew over Selborne a couple of months ago. The feeling is it's come from a release in Holland. So they went from Holland along the Kent coast.
Yes.
They've released them in the Isle of Wight. They've gone up to Oxfordshire and come back again. So that kind of maybe gives people a false impression that things are really good and they're not actually as good.
We've had one of your sea eagles from the Isle of Wight actually up here in the north quite a lot, and we're always seeing difference, aren't we? In that there's a vulture in the Peak District, which has come floated over from the Pyrenees. This happens naturally anyway to a degree. I think what I've done during lockdown, I really had an intensive study of my local area. I live near a cliff top, and that linear area is very rich in wildlife. And so throughout that time, I actually painted and drew and noted everything I saw. And it was really rich. But then I really noticed there was one little interaction with the fox family that basically made sure there's no fox probably then for another 5 to 10 miles around. Lapwings, the 4 families that we had in one field, they just about got through one family with 2 chicks. Whereas in the past, it would have been 100-fold of that. And every single thing that I started to get excited about, I realized was right on the edge. And I think that's pretty much, and this is a rich area. It's definitely a hot spot. So I think where we are across the country, is that, and particularly I think in the south actually, wildlife is really on the wane because it's been hammered down from so many different angles. So what we see, you're always just really pleased when we see something, aren't we, out of the ordinary now, even if it's relatively common. So that's our new baseline, our new norm is just be excited about what was really day to day.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, actually, and I don't know how you're dealing with this as a wildlife trust, but we're about to redevelop our Gilbert White displays or refresh them. We haven't got a huge amount of cash, but there's a wee bit, and we'd like to try to link what we're telling people in the house with opportunities to watch in the garden.
Yeah.
And talking to the families that come and visit us, they're not able to identify really common things.
That's right.
Wrens and great tit from a blue tit, and we're thinking that that's probably the way we should go. We should just give people some really basic tools so that they can just start.
I would love to see that. I mean, we get worried because we actually get students who come to us from university with great degrees or even higher degrees in countryside management and ecology. And actually, they don't know the basics. They can't identify different birds and insects, which we might, easily do if you're interested in it. So there is a bit of a knowledge gap, and I mean, obviously, there are plenty of people on Twitter and young people in particular who've taken real interest, and they're as brilliant as anybody has ever been. But actually, generally, unless you have a particular interest, lots of people don't know what is there, and they don't. But what I've seen during the lockdown, in particular, is that maybe those families who had hardly any interest at all, didn't really notice much nature, are actually passionately interested now. And actually, they don't really know or care what it's called, but they just love it. And they're taking pictures and they're posting stuff. I love that. It's like this great stream of beautiful consciousness about what's around us. And people love to record it. So, I think building people's knowledge is part of recognizing and caring for nature, isn't it? Actually, it does matter what, that you can identify things because it adds a different value to the whole pleasure of noticing nature, I think.
Yeah. Steph, I think you had a question. Steph's from she's the UK Biodiversity Training Manager at the Natural History Museum.
Yep, well remembered.
That's right.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
And the fencer, as you see.
Thanks for such a really interesting talk. It really captivated me. It was really interesting listening to you talk this afternoon. I was just wondering, because obviously, I've got a real passion in terms of my job at the museum, in terms of training people up around, how they actually start their natural history journey and how they continue that going forward. But we've seen a lot happening in people, during lockdown, obviously being more inspired by nature. And I mean, you mentioned 30 Days Wild, our City Nature Challenge back in April, even that was online completely, and we didn't think very far at all. We had more people engaging with that than we've ever had in any of the previous years that we've run it. So people really seized that opportunity to reach out to nature. How do you think we can capitalize on that now? How can we, as the Natural History Museum, as the Wildlife Trusts, the Wildlife Trust more broadly, as the Gilbert White Museum, how can we capitalize on that? Because now we're seeing, verges being mown back down again, parks being mowed back down again, people going out and doing terrible things in the countryside now that they can go down a little bit more, fires and all those sorts of things. How do you think we can capitalize on this?
Well, I think we have to really be open-minded about it and very accepting even of some of the less good behaviours that we've observed. I had this discussion with a national park officer in Northumberland just a couple of days ago, and actually they've seen people coming into the national park using the car parks and sites who've never been there before, and it's pretty obvious they don't actually have any learned behaviours about how to treat the countryside, and actually some of that isn't great. But he was saying, we've just got to be tolerant. If we want people, and we mean just general people in the public, to enjoy and love what we are trying to tell them about, then we have to actually at least welcome them and then start to not educate, because that's patronising really, but just effectively show them the way of how to explore and get the best out of interacting with nature. So I guess there's a big opportunity now that wasn't there before. There are going to be a lot more people who are just curious and getting the cultural habit of coming into countryside areas. And I think rather than deal with them as a problem, let's sort of try and embrace them. And I mean, one of the things we're always talking about in all of our work, I'm sure you are as well, is diversity and getting a much wider range of young people, people from all different backgrounds, ethnicity, everything, into our countryside and to reconnect with nature for their good and for ours and for the whole world. So it's an opportunity. So I think we have to be a little bit more lateral thinking in the programs, the events, the activities, the people we employ and where they come from and their background, so that we can naturally interact with a wider range of people. What we don't want is people after this to start to turn their back on the countryside and think, oh, well, that was then. I want to really get people who've just had a taste and want to do more of it. I think a lot of people think and know now it's part of their health system, their natural health system. You know, if they don't interact with nature, actually, they're probably not as well in their mind and body as they might be. I think there's a big realization. So I don't think it'll be that difficult, but we've got to be a bit clever about the programs and put aside some of our older attitudes.
Yeah, maybe we all need to be
more. That's a perfect answer. I couldn't agree more, particularly about getting more diverse communities out in engaging with nature, stuff right on their doorstep, and amazing, more natural spaces in the country. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. Yeah,
great, Graham. I think you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks. That was really interesting. I enjoyed the little talk. I live on I live on the outskirts of sort of central Derby. I live alone in a sort of fairly small urban/suburban, perhaps more urban than suburban, as it were. But I have noticed. I mean, the area is a wildlife desert, but I have been putting up a load of bird food. And since I've been doing that over the last sort of 6 months, I've just noticed the fact that the squirrels, and it's fairly common birds. I've got feeders up on feeders on the trees. I put food on the ground, but I've just noticed how even house sparrows and wood pigeons, collared doves, nothing exceptional, has really kind of raised my spirits in terms of lockdown. I do wonder if I would have coped anywhere near as well if they weren't there. And they're there literally 24 hours a day, dawn till dark. There's kind of at least something in the garden. But one thing we have noticed is it looks like within a week of going into lockdown, foxes have turned up in the garden. And again, asking, so we've no one in the area has seen them before. And we're just kind of assuming that once the restaurant shut, all these urban foxes, their food supply around the bins of the city centre pretty much dried up overnight. It was a strange coincidence. I just wondered, I wonder whether anyone else is sort of might be noticing similar things. Maybe COVID-19 is having impacts, maybe that's not quite the right word, on our wildlife in lots of different ways. But the fact the foxes have turned up in the garden, I think they've been searching for food. Certainly that they like pedigree chum.
Yeah, no, Graham, I think that's fantastic. First of all, that you have personally felt the impact of that interaction with nature, and you've actually noticed yourself. It's actually had almost a biorhythmic effect on you. It's actually helped you. It certainly has for me and many thousands of people. And actually, we should never be surprised, should we? Because actually, we are part of nature. We often think of ourselves as separate, but we're actually part of it. And we're actually physiologically a part of it. So actually, when we look at trees, as soon as we go into a wooded environment, our biochemistry actually changes, and it actually soothes us. And I think it's the same what I've noticed whenever I watch wildlife. I can actually feel my breath change. I think my blood pressure changes. I get into almost a bit of a meditative state, and I think I can feel my breathing change. And it is natural, because we're effectively hunter-gatherers. We were made to notice wildlife for our survival, and also that we felt part of it. And I think, some of our sort of spiritual sort of beliefs, etc., are based on that whole feeling of almost going into and being part of something bigger than ourselves. So I think that is very restful for our minds, and obviously for our bodies as well. So yeah, there is that. And certainly we've heard a lot from people about how they've noticed more nature. It's probably because they're out there, but also the countryside has been quieter, roads have been quieter. And because of that, we've certainly got different, I would say, different rhythms and movements of nature as well. I mean, we've got birds nesting in places they wouldn't normally, on nature reserves, on paths and in hides and things, because people aren't using them. And that's the same with car parks and public spaces generally, even some quite rare species. So people are seeing and interacting more. But yeah, definitely the animals are changing their habits around ours. And urban foxes, of course, or any foxes, are so omnivorous and so opportunistic that actually they adapt extremely well to whatever scenario. But I love those bits of nighttime footage from the police that have been on social media, of things like deer, wild boar, and all sorts of things in city centres that we didn't perhaps expect. I love all that.
Wasn't there a flock of goats came down from Snowdonia, didn't they? And weren't they trolling around the centre of London or something?
Absolutely. It's like a takeover, isn't it? I love it. They're sort of, really exploiting our sort of absence.
We're getting a taste of their medicine, really, aren't we?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great stuff. Well, we're getting a little bit close to the start of the next session now. It's at 16:45. So I've just got one more question for Mike, unless somebody else has got something to say. Please make a sign now if you have. Otherwise, I shall battle on. We talked very briefly about changing things as well, particularly as the climate's warming up. We've here in the museum, last year we noticed a colony of ivy bees, which I understand have only been in the UK for about 10 years, but they're very well established on Baker's Hill in the garden now. I just wondered whether you'd seen particular things in your neck of the woods that are remarkable.
Yeah, hummingbird hawk moths are the things, which again used to be just occasional visitors. We see them a lot now, even in the north, in the cold north. And, things like great white heron and cattle egret, they're starting to, obviously they're breeding in Somerset now. They've effectively come over from the Camargue, and the Somerset levels now are effectively almost like a wetland in parts of France. So you can see that advance, and it is coming into our northern areas as well. Even small things like holly blue butterflies, a whole range of insect species, dragonflies as well, slowly moving, not that slowly actually, moving northward. So that, yeah, I think again, Gilbert White would have loved that, wouldn't he? To actually find a whole new species like that, never been recorded before, be a big page in his diary. Yeah. And I have to say, I've moved house recently, and I'm in a new place overlooking the sea. And I've been like him. Every single thing I see that's new is a great surprise to me. I've seen 60 species of different birds since I've moved here in a month. And even things like dunnock and black-headed gull, if you haven't seen them before in one particular place, is exciting. Mm-hmm. And I do remember that very much, that, Gilbert White was all about that, wasn't he? It was the unusual, but also recording the commonplace as well and seeing the bits. So yeah, no, he'd have a lot. He'd hardly be able to keep up with the changes that are happening around us that we're seeing now. His quill would be broken with writing it all down.
Rosina, we've got about 2 minutes, so quick question. I've not got control here. I can't unmute you. Hold on a minute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, got it now. Great.
Sorry, I haven't really got a question. I just wanted to say thank you. That was great. It's Rosina's my daughter. I couldn't get on Zoom. I'm in here. It's Angie, actually. So hi. But thanks. That was a really interesting talk. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much to Mike for his time today and in putting the presentation together. Thank you everyone for joining us and for an interesting discussion. And hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Great pleasure. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.